Okay, cool. We're live. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you're tuning in from, and welcome to a special female edition of SIC Maui Talk Stories. Hopefully, I'm coming through much more clearly this morning than I was yesterday. I was having some internet connectivity issues. Y'all know how that goes and how frustrating that is. So if you're tuning in again, or maybe this time was even better for you, thanks so much for your patience and for being here, because this is a topic that I'm really, really excited about sharing with you this morning. So what we're going to talk about today is core stability, pelvic diaphragm, breathing, body mechanics, how all of this relates to becoming a better, more connected paddler. And of course, I'm going to give some tips. Not that these tips aren't great actually for any paddler, male or female, but I really wanted to deliver this one first and foremost to you ladies. So yeah, if you're joining and you want to play along this today, right now, or I guess even if you're watching the replay, I am going to show a few exercises towards the end that can help you to start to feel and engage what we're working on here. Exercises that you can do off the water. I can't really show you on water exercises, but if you do want to play along, grab a foam roller and a mat or a just a soft surface that you can be on your hands and knees. So yeah, cool. Without further ado, let's jump in. So as always, leave a comment, say hi, let me know where you're tuning in from, ask me questions. Let's make this interactive, let's make it fun for everybody. So yeah, we hear of course core stability. That's something that we pretty much understand what that means, and I'm going to talk about where true core stability comes from, and I want to talk about what we hear called the pelvic floor a lot. And not that floor is an incorrect term, yet a more appropriate, more descriptive term of what's actually happening is to call it the pelvic diaphragm. So I'm going to talk about how we can start to identify with not only our main breathing diaphragm, but how that's connected to our pelvic diaphragm as well, and how that helps us to become a more stable and more powerful paddler. And translates to, of course, I know I've gotten a lot of questions, and I will talk a little bit at the end about pregnancy and postpartum. Of course, I'm not there yet, but what I do know in any modifications and how this relates to that, because that was a question I got asked a lot leading up to this talk. So yeah, let's dive in. Hey Emma, thanks for tuning in. The core muscles, right, that we think of initially are, of course, we think of, I'm going to back up a little bit so you can maybe see me better. Of course, we think of our, I don't have them right now. And I actually want to make a special note about what we call our abs, right? So the rectus abdominis, these six-pack muscles, right? We think about our obliques, those side muscles on the sides. We think about our maybe our lats, our erector spinae. We actually the glutes are even related to the core, and the hip flexors as well are related to the core, especially that psoas muscle. So those are ones we hear about a lot, we think about a lot. We think about strengthening a lot and using a lot. What I want to talk more about today are actually what's called the intrinsic core muscles. So the intrinsic core muscles are the diaphragm, where we are the main primary breathing muscle. I want to talk about the transverse abdominis. So transverse abdominis is actually underneath the rectus abdominis, underneath the obliques, and wraps, and actually is what really holds the stability of the core. So we can't see that one, but it's super important, and we're going to talk about how to work on that. The multifidi, so the erector spinae are the flexion and extension of the spine. The multifidi are the stabilization muscles of the spine, so really important. And then of course the pelvic diaphragm, and how that can actually be one of the most important ones, because when we talk about stability, we're talking about strength from the inside out, not from the outside in. And the pelvic muscles are everything that's within the pelvis, within the hips. And as we know as paddlers, or if you don't know as paddlers, I'll probably say this a few more times today, the most important joint for paddling or for any full body movement is the hips. So what's going on inside of the hips is pretty important. So our core, of course, is the main functions of our core to protect the spine, right? The movement of the spine, flexion, extension. We have lateral movement of the spine. We have rotation of the spine. The core muscles are generating, protecting all of that. And transferring and connecting the power from lower body to upper body and vice versa, right? And so that's really important as a paddler or anyone who does any full body movements, because we really want to maintain that connection between upper and lower body. And that's something that I see a lot in paddlers that I work with, you know, in one-on-one lessons or even through video analysis, is there's often a disconnect between what's happening in our upper body and what's happening in our lower body, and connecting those as paddlers, and that's really what I'm going to talk about today with the pelvis. Connecting those as a paddler can make you so much stronger and more effective, right? Is that making sense? Let me know if at any time you need clarifications. If you have questions, just throw them in the comments, and hopefully I'll be able to see them. So yeah, those are the core muscles, the intrinsic core muscles I want to talk about today, and the function of the core. So quick note on six packs. And that's the rectus abdominis, you know, what we see on the outside. And not that it's not an indicator of core strength, but really let's not talk about whether they're just for show or not. Let's talk about as women specifically. If we are, this is kind of a side note, but I think it's a really important one to mention. If we are lean enough to have really defined and really, flat stomachs, right? It's a very masculine physical appearance. And not that there's anything necessarily wrong with that. Of course, I've had my fair share of abdominal muscles and pride in that, of course, as an athlete, because that's what we're conditioned to think is the ideal. But as a woman, actually what's ideal and what's optimal for health of our body, if we are lean enough to have that much muscular definition, there is almost certainly going to be an imbalance in our hormones, in our sex hormones. And so there can be reasons, there can be times when maybe as an athlete that is benefiting you to be that lean, but the note I'm trying to make here, this really special, really heartfelt note that I'm trying to make here, is like we need to drop as women who want to be whole and optimally healthy in our body, especially who are still of ages age where we're bleeding, whether or not we care about fertility or not, we care about our cycle as a vital sign of health. And when an optimal health as a woman is not to have that super chiseled look, and so we beat ourselves up when we don't have that, and we crave it and we covet it, and we look at other women and we compare ourselves, and it's like, I just want all of that to stop, and I just want all women to realize that, you know, we're actually meant to have a little bit more, especially in our belly area and in our hip area. As a female being, that's what's natural and that's what's healthy. And if we work on these internal intrinsic core muscles, which I'm going to talk about now, we can be just as strong, if not stronger, when we're in a full state of health. So that's my PCA for this talk. Let me know how that lands with you, because I'm super passionate about women's health now, and I've studied in the last 2 years so much about hormones, and learned a lot through this process and challenges with it. So and I just love relating it to being a better paddler, as I like relating everything to being a better paddler and a better human. So so let's talk about the diaphragm. Diaphragm is located underneath the lower ribs here. It's, you know, kind of a big umbrella shaped muscle, and what it does is when we breathe in, it expands and lowers. That's why the belly often goes out when we breathe in, and when we exhale, it comes back up, goes in and up. And actually, and that's a really great, like, deep belly breathing. I've done 2 talks on breathing this year, so it's really important, and I would love for you, if you're interested more in breathing, to go back, and I'll cite this again at the end, and watch a couple of the talks I did on breathing. I did one on more relaxing meditative breathing, and that's that deep belly breath, and then one that's more on athletic and performance breathing, and that's this diaphragm. Well, they're both diaphragmatic breaths because you can't breathe without your diaphragm, but that's this more rib cage focused breath, where instead of breathing into the belly or up in the chest, we are breathing into the rib cage wide. And so let's just practice a few breaths here together for a moment. If you want to put your fingers around your low rib cage, thumbs wrapped around the back, and give a gentle pressure. And as you inhale, I want you to see if you can feel pushing out wide, so your rib cage expanding wide as you inhale, and then coming back as you exhale. And so you should feel the fingers creating space between those fingertips a little bit. So the hands are moving out as you inhale, there's a little bit of space being created between the fingertips, and then you have a gentle pressure as you exhale, and that all comes back together. So that's the reason that okay, let's talk about a couple other things that are happening. As I inhale, that rib cage is expanding. Let's go even one step further. As I exhale, I'm going to try to keep that expansion, and I'm going to pull everything up and actually pull the belly in. So as I inhale, rib cage goes wider. As I exhale, belly comes in and up, right? Because the diaphragm goes in and up on the exhale. So it's kind of like each breath, I'm trying to get a little bit longer and a little bit wider. And you should feel actually some of those transverse abdominis and even the pelvic floor muscles start to engage. I'll talk a little bit more about those. And feel like you're actually creating some length in the body, some breadth across the chest. And why this is important, how we breathe, is so important to our posture, to our body mechanics, to our performance. And so think about when you're paddling, and I'm just gonna pretend like I'm knee paddling for a minute, but think about when you're paddling and you're here, and what's really common is like to do this kind of collapsing in the chest and having the shoulders kind of roll forward, and I'm really compressing this area that I was just telling you to really breathe out and wide into, right? So the way that I'm breathing, what happens is the rib cage is expanding. The shoulder blades are riding the rib cage expansion. So proper rib cage movement and expansion as you breathe is going to help the shoulders stay in a more appropriate, more expansed, more relaxed position. It's going to help the chest stay more open. So how this ties into core stability is, one thing that I say a lot to paddlers is chest up. Well, if I'm here and I'm kind of in this rounded position and then all I do is pull my chest up, well, all I've done is put this awkward extension into my spine, right? I'm still compressed here, and now I've put tension into the middle of my back from trying to just pull my chest up. When instead, what I'd rather do is maintain this neutral spine, something I talked a lot about in the hip hinging talk story, if you haven't seen that one, is maintain this neutral spine and maintain this width with my breath, with my rib cage going out, and that's going to automatically keep the shoulders open, the chest open, and the chest up. So the other thing that happens with the rib cage is I want to think about, again, going out wide and not necessarily out. And this would be so much easier to demonstrate all of this. I hope you can still see clearly what's happening, even though there's a lot extra happening in my body right now. But so the other thing that happens when we go here and we extend through the spine rather than keeping a neutral spine and staying out wide is our rib cage flares out. So I'm going to come close so you can kind of see, hopefully, a little bit. So I want to breathe wide, and then I want to, rather than extend through the spine to keep my chest up, I want to feel this lowest rib here. I want to pull it down. And I don't know if you can see, maybe a little bit. But so if I arch a little bit in my upper back, which I see paddlers doing, we're either here or we're here a lot of times, and very rarely are we here, right? And so if I arch and my rib cage flares up, you can kind of feel the bottom ribs kind of flare out and up. I want you to take that and I want you to pull those back down towards your hip bones, or down towards your belly button. And hopefully you can see the difference between here, breathing here, and breathing here. So rib cage out wide and rib cage pulled down towards your belly button. So this all stays broad. Across the chest because I'm breathing out wide. I'm here. And especially when I rotate, I don't want to arch. And let me rotate this way. Especially when I rotate, I don't want to flare my rib cage out. I want to pull my rib cage down. I'm not rounding. I'm staying wide. I'm staying shoulders back. I'm staying in a neutral spine. And my rib cage is here. So this is core stabilization for the upper core, what's happening above the belly button, which is all very connected to what's happening below, and very connected to what's happening in the shoulders. And of course the breath is the most important tool that we have for freaking everything, but definitely endurance and performance. So yeah, I'm not answering questions about the baby. You can ask me all the questions about this topic, but so just to recap, core stability from the top down, breathing out wide into the rib cage and keeping the bottom ribs pulled down towards the belly button, and you should feel that engagement wrapped around here. And that should help with shoulder position, with chest staying open when we are here and here paddling. Okay, I see another question. Oh, you're so welcome. It is a difficult, so Anna's, just mentioning how I was talking about six packs in women's bodies and the difference between men and women's bodies and how we, what we have as an ideal. And it is a tricky topic to talk about. And I especially feel like nowadays there's like no topic you can't talk about that's not going to offend someone in some way. So just know that, as always, my intentions are always to serve and to help, and especially women. So yeah, I love to dive more into that. Maybe that could be a whole nother topic. So let's continue with these intrinsic core muscles. But thank you, Anna, for saying that. I really appreciate that. Let's continue with these intrinsic core muscles and how to properly engage them for core stability. And so let's talk about what's happening from the bottom up. So let's talk about what's happening with the pelvic diaphragm. So we did a little breathing exercise. Let's see, I wish I had my yoga ball out here so that's something comfy to sit on. So we did a little breathing exercise for diaphragmatic ribcage breathing. Let's do a little breathing exercise to connect to the pelvic diaphragm. So there's so many different ways to breathe. And for those of you that haven't really worked much or heard about much, because when you're pregnant, I feel like it's one of all you hear about. But with the pelvic diaphragm and how that works is just to connect with that for a minute. Let's take a few breaths in as you inhale. Okay, I love this visualization, especially as a paddler too. Think about a jellyfish, okay? So picture you're watching a jellyfish, like really slowly, just like moving itself through the water. And it's opening up, and as it comes back together, it sort of moves forward a little bit, and then it opens up, and as it comes back together, it sort of, so picture this jellyfish in your mind, and then as you inhale, think about opening up, and it's sort of down and open. And as you exhale, think about that coming together, up and in. And as you inhale, think about down and open or down and out. And as you exhale, think about coming together, coming in and up. So exhale, down and out. Sorry, inhale, down and out. Exhale, in and up. So let's take that a little bit deeper. You're gonna go inhale, down and out. You're gonna go exhale, in and up, 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 right? So think about it. We're gonna now combine this image of this jellyfish breath with, on my exhale, I'm going to go in and up, and now that jellyfish is gonna go up an elevator towards my belly button. The hips are also gonna pull in towards the belly button. So don't strain or anything. This is just gentle. If my cues are not with your breath, go with your breath rhythm, of course. So that exhaling in and up, 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 we're engaging our pelvic floor muscles. We're pulling up, not just from the front, like you're trying to pull, a blueberry up through the front, but think about from the back as well. So there's going to be a slight glute engagement as well from the back coming up, because again, the glutes are related as well to the core. So, but what we're not actually trying to target is the glutes. We're trying to target from the perineum or from the anus and from the vagina and even forward. Like there's all of these muscles down there, front to back, that actually can come together and come up. And I almost kind of lift a little bit as that happens. And I'm also going to pull, just like I pulled the rib cage towards the belly button, I'm going to pull those hip bones and sort of wrap them towards the belly button. So this is getting into that wrapping, is sort of getting into that transverse abdominis that I was telling you are those internal core muscles that wrap and really protect the spine and protect the low back, right? And we're trying to avoid a lot of this flexion and extension when we're paddlers. We're trying to avoid loading into our spine when we're paddling, and we're trying to keep this stable core and use that as the connection between the power that's happening in our lower body and our upper body. So where was I? Right, we were jellyfish breathing. And we were talking about the engagement of the lower abdominals for core stability and that pelvic diaphragm for core stability. So you can do this at, like 100%, and it's actually, after a few minutes, can get quite tiring, especially if it's not something you've practiced before. And so how this relates to paddling, right, is because again, like I said a few minutes ago, what's happening inside the hips is just as important as what's happening outside the hips, right, in my glutes and my hip flexors. In terms of, it would be like as if I was thinking, okay, I'm paddling and I want to engage my hips when I'm paddling, but it's kind of like thinking about only engaging some of the muscles but not all of them to get a complete picture of what's happening down there and how I can most effectively use my hips when I'm paddling. And so the hips, again, is the most important part of paddling, and I am going to show you some exercises how we can, if some of this is not connecting for you, how on land you can do this. But let's talk about how, as a paddler, I might have to put this up a little bit, how as a paddler we're going to put this all together. So I talked about on your reach and your rotation, which your rotation is your reach, we're going to breathe wide into the rib cage, but we're not going to flare out, right? So we're breathing wide into the rib cage, and at the catch, I'm getting my body weight onto the blade. My rib cage is staying pulled down. And this isn't 100% engagement, because that's going to get really tired. That's going to be really tiring, but think about just enough engagement to protect the spine from going into extension or flexion when you're paddling. This is helping you maintain that neutral spine, as well as your proper hip hinging, which we talked about in, a few weeks ago. So we're going to go here, right? And then what happens at the catch, this is all happening at the catch, because what I see a lot of times is, I talk a lot about driving with the backs of the legs. So our stroke is really leg dominant. The one that I teach, if this is new to you, we got to go back a few extra sessions. But the stroke being really leg dominant and really driving from the backs of the legs. And what I see a lot, again, is that disconnect between the upper body and getting that lower body to engage and drive from the backs of the legs. So not only do we need to get those glutes to engage, we actually want, at the catch, the hips and the whole pelvis to be engaged as well. So that pulling up front to back, that pulling in, and so think about inhaling wide through the rib cage and exhaling, pulling everything together. You should feel some really deep core engagement, and especially in this lowest part of your torso between the hips, because I want to feel that at the catch engaged, so that immediately my hips are ready to start to drive forward, because if not, I can really very easily have a disconnect with my hips, and I can kind of go here and kind of go here, and then I go here, and then I'm really trying to pull with the backs of my legs, but they're not quite. There's a timing issue. If you've worked with me one-on-one or video analysis, I talk a lot about the timing between getting those hips right at the catch to be engaged to drive forward, and this pelvic engagement is really, I've found, again, this is what I think about and how I paddle and what works for me, and take it if it works for you, great, and if it doesn't, there's no right or wrong. This is just for strength, stability, and for spinal health, right? So So to be with this pelvic engagement at the catch, that's going to help me to better keep my hip flexors and my glutes really engaged, to connect the timing between catching and driving with my hips, so that I'm not going here, 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 and then my hips are catching up. I'm trying to immediately at the catch have those hips start driving. I'm not sure if that's coming through clearly on me demoing here on land. So, you know, drop something in the comments. Drop something in the comments if it is landing, not landing, what questions you have, any further clarifications I can make on what I was just demoing in terms of why that and how we engage from the lowest part of our core, which is our pelvic diaphragm, and the upper part of our core, which is our main breathing diaphragm. And again, not 100% like, I'm keeping this all like super tight, because that's a lot of work, but keeping that engagement for stability, for maintaining, helping maintain the neutral spine, and helping connect between the upper body and the lower body for the timing of our paddle stroke, so that we can have more power and more speed. And the timing, I know that gets into a little bit more complicated stroke, and if you're still at the beginning of like learning how to paddle and you're like, what is she talking about with the legs and the driving? Don't worry about it for now. Just practice some of these breathing exercises, and yeah, think about how it can relate not to maybe driving with the legs if that's new for you, but how it can relate to maintaining a neutral spine so that you're not loading up into the back as you paddle, because that's one of the main complaints that I hear from paddlers. So I'm going to show you a couple of exercises you can do on land to help you know whether or not you're actually doing this, feeling this, and also how to make it stronger off land. I'm always a big fan of land-based exercises to be learning and or strengthening what we're doing on the water. So some land-based exercises that you can be doing for core stability is some really basic ones that y'all know about, but we're going to add a foam roller. So we're going to come into a hands and knees position, and you need to find your sacrum, which is that flat spot above, here's my tailbone, and here's between my hip bones, and there's this like flat triangle right there. That's my sacrum. I'm going to put the foam roller right over top of this sacrum, and I'm going to come onto hands and knees. And if I'm not engaged in the core, it's going to feel really hard. And then if I think about drawing up and drawing in, hip bones drawing in, rib cage drawing down, and feeling that engagement really top to bottom of my torso, from my root, even from my root underneath my tailbone, pulling up and in, that should feel really stable. And if I release that, all of a sudden the foam roller feels a little bit wobbly. So I'm going to pull that in. The other thing that's happening, you probably can't see it because I have a baby hanging from my belly, but when we are not engaged in the core, we're going to have this sort of doming, or, you know, like there's going to be, especially when we start to do a plank, which I'll show you in a minute, the rectus abdominis, those exterior muscles are going to sort of pop out. And we don't want them to pop out. We actually want everything to flatten, so that if I looked back, I don't want to see anything popping out. I want to see everything pulling in. So, how I know if I'm doing this correctly, the easiest thing to start with is some arm raises, making sure the foam roller doesn't fall. If that feels good, I'm going to try to lift and lower legs, making sure the foam roller doesn't fall. So one thing that happens when we're not engaged is a lot of rocking from side to side. If I lift this one and I lean and dump into this hip, that foam roller is going to fall. So I'm going to, whoop, there it goes. So I'm going to engage everything. And so start there, and then the next step up is, if I feel good with that, I'm going to do some bird dogs. So that's arm and leg at the same time. I'm going to bring them in. And out. And of course, I always want to do both sides. You probably want to do about 5 or 8 on one side at a time. I'm just going to show a couple for timing's sake. So another thing that happens a lot of times is this hip wants to rotate out. When we reach it back, again, having the roller on your back is not going to allow you to do that. So that feels really good. Next level up from there, I think I forgot to mention, my knees are right underneath my hips, my hands are right underneath my shoulders. Did talk about how my core is engaged. So next step up from there is I'm just going to hover the knees. So this is a bear crawl position, just hovering the knees. And if that feels good, I'm going to try to do a few bear crawls. So it's opposite hand and foot. These are nice and slow. My knees stay nice and low to the ground. My core stays nice and engaged so that I can do these without the roller falling. You would do about 5 to 8 forward and backwards. You can also do those side to side. It's hard to talk and breathe and demo at the same time. So we have bird dogs, we have bear crawls. Notice that when I release everything, well, I also have extra weight, but it really puts in an arch or a extension into my spine. And when I draw everything in, my core, my spine really goes back to neutral. So the next level up from there would be to come into a full plank. And I can try some leg lifts. Again, I'm going to really have to feel that hip engagement, those hips drawing into center to be able to lift one leg and then the other. And I can try some shoulder taps. Again, I'm trying not to rock from side to side. When one arm lifts up, I really want to keep that core stability. Oh, hard to talk and breathe and demo at the same time, to not rock from side to side. So those are some exercises you can try on land to know if you're engaging, and practice engaging the core. So let's see, what else? Yeah, just another quick note on pregnancy, since I did have a few women ask about that. We do a lot of pelvic diaphragm exercises, pregnancy and postpartum. When you're pregnant, you're actually focusing more on down and out, that expansion, because we need everything to release down and out when birthing. But making sure that, of course, we're going both directions is important. And then postpartum, the focus is on that in and up to reconnect and re-strengthen everything. So it's a matter of, a lot of times we think we've heard about Kegels and we're just like, there's one point and we're pulling that up, but there's think about the whole bowl, right? The whole bowl. And think about really doing that with the breath, right? We're not just arbitrarily squeezing, we're really doing that with the breath. And it's not just about in and up. It is also, even if you're not pregnant or planning on being pregnant or giving birth, also on being able to release, relax, and down and out as well, because that's what we need for peeing and pooping and sex and all sorts of other really important things that we do, and to have pleasure in those as well. So that's what I got for you today. Questions, comments, concerns, clarifications. Yeah. Cool. Well, that was fun. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you to SIC, and of course for having this specific page just for women, so that we can talk about fun things like this. And I'm an open book, ladies. Please reach out and let me know your questions. Like, you know, ones maybe you're too shy to ask about on a public comment thread. I get it, and I'm here for it. So yeah, thank you. Thank SIC. Thanks. Yeah, for being awesome. And I will see you soon. Have a wonderful day.